in international forum, the new dynamic in international economy, the Russian agenda, and as a person who works on the news, let me remind you what has been happening over the past days and months. Recently, the dream was how do we organize our trade, normal trade with the European Union. And then Brexit came recently. The position of the United States was on the top of the international agenda. But then Mr. Trump was elected, and now, over the past 24 hours, all the talk is about the possible exit of the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement. Well, the European Union, the remaining European Union without Germany, interesting. I would like to ask all of them to talk about whether we can now talk about any common agenda, any agenda that everyone might understand. But this is a special panel, and I will ask our guests to answer a simple question. What brought them to St. Petersburg?
I hope you haven't had any problems with the translation. So, sir, welcome to the Russian Federation. If you could answer some of the questions which you have already sort of pointed, but also explain why we are seeing you here today in this country. On the mic, please.
Well, for a very simple reason. I'm extremely grateful for this invitation, and I think it's a very important opportunity to discuss the problems of our international community and our global economy. And I would say that the main problem is a deficit of confidence, a deficit of trust. Trust between public opinions, the general public, and political establishments, north and south, east and west. Trust between the same public opinions and the global governance mechanisms or international organizations, and trust among countries. And it is clear for me that we have had a process of globalization and technological progress that brought an enormous increase in wealth, an improvement in the living conditions around the world, even a reduction in the number of absolute poor, but at the same time it dramatically increased the inequalities among people. And also, to a certain extent, among countries, but essentially among people, even within the borders of each country. Today, the 8 richest persons in the world have the same amount of wealth of half of the world's population. And at the same time, the globalization, and especially the technological progress, left people behind, left regions behind, to a certain extent countries behind. We have seen the discussion in the United States about the Rust Belt, how the Rust Belt had voted. The anxiety in the Rust Belt, the frustration in the Rust Belt. There are many Rust Belts around the world. And if one looks, for instance, at the problems of youth unemployment in the Middle East and North Africa, even also in the southern part of Europe, but especially in the Middle East of North Africa, they are not only a dramatic problem for the young people, a terrible handicap for their economies, but also a threat for a global security, because it is in youth unemployment in that area that terrorist organizations are recruiting now the elements that cause a tremendous impact in the lack of our global security. And so, in this situation, we see fragility. We see that a global upturn in the economy does not solve the problems everywhere. There are areas of fragility, and we see that the global megatrends, population growth, a rapid urbanization, food insecurity, water scarcity, but above all climate change, the main accelerator of all other global trends in the world, are increasing those fragilities. Contributing also to this dramatic problem of trust in the world, especially when not everybody recognizes that climate change must be an absolute priority for the today. And on the other hand, all these things are linked to problems of conflict that is multiplying, conflicts that are more and more complex, new threat of global terrorism, with the impact, the asymmetric impact of globalization, with the inability to manage properly migration, and with the new threat of terrorism, it is absolutely essential to have the capacity to respond. And there is a huge responsibility of the United Nations. But we need a reformed United Nations, much more effective, much more cost-effective, and much more linked to the needs of the people and to the aspirations of the people. That is why I'm so engaged both in the reform of the peace and security sector, the UN development system, and our internal management processes, in order to allow for the UN to be system and our internal management processes, in order to allow for the UN to be more able to prevent conflicts and to help in solving the conflicts that exist, in fighting more effectively and supporting states to fight more effective terrorism, but especially in promoting the kind of solutions we need for the globalization to be more fair, namely the Sustainable Development Goals and the implementation of the Paris Agreement on climate change, and to mobilize countries, international community, the business sector, in order to be able to address those challenges in a way in which people feel that governments, international organizations care for them, that nobody is left behind, and that trust can be re-established as a key tool in order to be able for us to face the challenges of today. Some might say, oh, we don't need the multilateral system of governance because the world is becoming multipolar, and multipolarity by itself will solve the problems and will bring harmony. That is a big mistake. If one looks at Europe before the First World War, Europe was multipolar, but in the absence of a multilateral governance system, the result was the First World War. Let's make sure we don't make the same mistake today, from the point of view of the global economy, but also from the point of view of the global security.
Thank you, Secretary General.